And so now, a special sequence of programmes celebrating the life and work of Humphrey Lyttelton, who died in April. In 45 minutes, Stephen Fry hosts a tribute to the man known to Radio 4 listeners as the chairman of I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. But first, Humph Sunday begins with an edition of Desert Island Discs, which was first broadcast in 2006, presented by Kirsty Young.
My castaway this week is the jazz musician and veteran radio presenter Humphrey Lyttelton. He formed his first band in 1948 and, described by Louis Armstrong as Britain's top trumpeter, has been touring ever since. His chosen profession betrays an upper-crust lineage. His father was a famous housemaster at Eton, and childhood holidays were often spent at the stately homes of titled relatives. His radio career began with shows about jazz, but it's in his role as Chairman Humph on Radio 4's I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue that he's gained cult status as the deadpan purveyor of blue-chip filth to Middle England. Humphrey Lyttelton, you've been a quizmaster then on that show since 1972, but your real love, your first love, jazz.
Yes, indeed, yes. Sometimes people ask me, what's the most important thing? And I say, well, if ever I slump forward, it's not going to be on a computer keyboard. It'll be trumpet in hand.
What is it about the jazz that so captivates you?
Well, I was fascinated by music from a very, very early age. The trumpet came quite late. I had a love affair with the harmonica for a long time.
And drums as well? You played
and drums, yes. I fiddled about with that for a while, and my mother thought, as mothers do, that I was showing enormous promise. So she answered an advert in the local paper for a drum teacher. And a man called Mr. Glass came down, and I can remember the moment when he came into the room, and my mother said, of course, Humphrey's worked a lot on the drums himself, and he's learned quite a lot. To which Mr. Glass said, well, we'll soon unlearn him all that.
You, of course, moved on to the trumpet. What was it about the trumpet that interested you from the beginning? Did something spark your imagination?
I was rather taken by the sight of Louis Armstrong playing the trumpet, because he was had him in heraldic posture with the trumpet pointing at the ceiling.
That's with the head thrown back.
Head thrown back and everything. And it was only when I started to learn the trumpet that I discovered that it's absolutely fatal if you do that, because, if you'll pardon the expression, all the spit runs back into the mouthpiece, and you get a rather bubbling performance in the wrong sense of the word.
You are still performing at the age of 85. Has your appetite to perform, your appetite to tour diminished at all?
Not in the slightest. I'm rather worried about it. No, it hasn't. I still wake up in the morning with ideas. Sometimes they keep me awake at the crack of dawn. Ideas for things to do with the band. I've just done a recording session. We did 19 tracks in 4 days, and every morning I've been waking up with tunes in my head. And as long as that goes on, I want to get out there with the band and play them.
We're going to talk about that much later. Let's hear your first Desert Island disc.
Well, I go to that time when I was learning the drum with Mr. Glass, and he first of all took me up to the Victoria Barracks up in Windsor, waiting for the band to come out of the barracks and lead the guard, the new guard, up to Windsor Castle, where they do the changing of the guard. And I can remember still the thrill of hearing the command, by the left, quick march, and then you'd have the 5-beat roll on the drums. So I'd like to have a record by one of my heroes, Kenneth Alford, the British march king. His most famous march has been very badly treated. Rude words have been put to it, and so on, but it's always a favourite of mine, and has in one section of it a counter melody which is absolutely beautiful.
Okay, so Humphrey, you didn't just go to Eton, you were born at Eton in the spring of 1921.
I was, yes, May the 23rd, 1921.
And that was because your dad was a schoolmaster?
My dad was a schoolmaster. He was an assistant master then, which was all the masters who weren't house-masters were called assistant masters, and I was born there.
And it was a sort of classic upper crust household of the 1920s. I mean, the children were separate in the house, and there were nursemaids, and mummy was somewhere downstairs.
That's right, yes. I was brought up by a Nanny Viggers, a very, very strict lady, but a very nice lady.
She was pretty vigorous with the slipper, I understand it, Nanny Vickers.
That was the first time I ever discovered that part of life was to bend over and be hit on the backside by some implement of some kind.
Difficult now for people of the generation who are having children to understand that. I mean, if you woke in the middle of the night in tears, or you had a bad cold, or was it Mummy you went to, or was it Nanny Vickers you went to?
Oh, Nanny Vickers. And she said there was a spare bed in her bedroom, and you could sleep in there for the rest of the night. I think it was quite a common thing with nannies. You spend so much of your life with them that you were absolutely heartbroken when they left.
Did you have a close relationship with your mother, though? I mean, were things good between you and Mum, or did you not really see her very often?
Oh no, they were always good. My mother she was an amazing person. She was very humorous, but my mother she was a very strong woman. But she went from an upbringing in Babram Hall, with butlers and servants and all this kind of business. She went in 1916 to the front, so that within 3 weeks of leaving that sort of very sheltered upbringing, she was behind the lines outside Rouen.
And so tending the injured soldiers on the front line, did that leave its mark on her? Did she talk about that to you?
She did. We went to see the scenes of battle, in France sometime in our teens. And I remember my mother, when confronted with the graves, which were just one whole field, and she broke down then.
You had 4 sisters. You were the only boy. So did you ever feel overwhelmed by all that femininity?
When I was about 8, I suppose, my parents bought me a bicycle for Christmas. And I hopped on it and pedalled fast, because all my sisters were at boarding school as well, and they all had very hearty friends who used to come. And I was an age when one sort of bolted from hearty females. I still do, actually.
You were quite a shy boy.
I was very shy, yes, terribly. I set fire to a vicar once, out of shyness.
Now you're going to have to explain yourself.
Well, I was wandering about the house at the age of, I don't know, 5, 6 or something. One of the parents wandered in, and he was a vicar. And I was suddenly confronted in the hallway of the house by this total stranger, and didn't know what to do at all. So in desperation, I lowered my head and butted him in the midriff, and he burst into flames, which might have been some evidence that I had some kind of satanic influence in my early days. But the truth was that he had a packet of Swan Vestas non-safety matches in his waistcoat, and I'd ignited the whole lot with one punch. But that's what shyness does for you.
What's your second record?
Second record goes to a love that I shared with my father of the monologues that were recorded in the mid-30s by Arthur Marshall. And my father and I used to love this. It was one of the meeting points, there was, and we both played golf, so that we had quite a lot of time together. A lot of it was heaving with laughter at Arthur Marshall's description, for example, in the role of a schoolmistress, taking the children on a nature walk.
Left, right, keep in step at the head of the crocodile. Sylvia, dear, don't slop about so. Hips firm and torso trim, if you please. That's the ticket, we'll soon be there. Oh, eyes left, girls, eyes left. Look, there's a really splendid specimen of a Jersey cow. What a fine, sturdy old creature she is, to be sure. Now, what's she up to, I wonder? Oh, eyes right, girls, eyes right, Millie, eyes right, dear, this instant. Left, right, Gloria. Put that marshmallow back into your satchel and swing your arm properly. Left, right. Ah, here we are at the meadow. Crocodile, halt. Crocodile, left, turn. Crocodile, sit down on the ground, but sit gingerly. Look out, sir. Ah, just in time. Well, girls, here we are, right in the thick of nature's generous pageant. Spring, heavenly miracle, a wondrous cycle. Brenda, manners. Spring, sprouting shoots and shooting sprouts. Spring, season of joy, and don't pick your face, Hilda. It's not a bit of good. Mother Nature's a wily one, dear. She'll have her way, do what you will. However, girls, we mustn't sit idling here. To work, and hunt about for some leafy treasures. Now, Chloe, dear, a real effort this time. Last week you were a mass of what, and nothing else. Ah, me, the merry month of May has flown, and King Cricket has lost a quarter of his reign. But all the same, girls, where is leafy June? Where is the magic that is summer? And where is Elspeth? Oh, looks! She's fallen plumb in the river. Life-saving team, form up. Inflate water wings. Keep your head, Elspeth, dear. Where's your sang-froid? What? It's full of water? Well, girls, bring her back alive, and I'll double the cocoa ration.
Chuckling away to that, Humphrey Lyttelton. Humphrey, that was Arthur Marshall and the Nature Walk. There was clearly then your father being a schoolmaster at Eton, clearly no question of where you would eventually go to school, but you went in the beginning to a boarding school aged 8 in Surrey, and you've said that you felt marooned there, that there was much nocturnal sobbing under the blankets. You weren't happy at being sent away from home.
Well, I was 8 years old. My parents took me there, and, I was full of apprehension. We were met by the headmaster, Mr. Crabtree. Sounds Dickensian, doesn't it? And there were a lot of bumptious boys already there who made friends already. Oh, dreadful. And then my parents, I think, thought the best thing to do was to hand me over to Mr. Crabtree and then get in the car and head off for the gate without saying goodbye or anything else. They thought that would be the best thing. And I can imagine my father saying to my mother, who was probably very upset, don't worry, he's probably made a lot of friends already. Well, in fact, I hadn't.
When you were at school then, was he a teacher there, Geoffrey Fox, somebody who actually was instrumental in forming you as a little boy and guiding you?
Yes, Geoffrey Fox took over from Mr. Crabtree.
So he was the headmaster?
He was the headmaster. It was a complete difference in style. And one of the things I did for him was doing cartoons on the stage. It was known then as lightning cartoons. He had a huge layout pad. I must have looked a right idiot. I stood up there, doing these things and reading this patter about people like Mahatma Gandhi, Charlie Chaplin, and people like that.
So even in those early days, I mean, you clearly had the facility for doing a bit of a turn.
Oh, yes. I think I was a bit of a ham even at that stage.
You started playing trumpet then at Eton, was it at the age of around about 15?
Yes.
How did it all begin?
Well, I'd had a band as a playing the harmonica, but then I heard Louis Armstrong and wanted to play the trumpet, so I got my mother to buy me a trumpet, and I walked into Charing Cross Road wearing, I may tell you, at the age of 15, a top hat, a tailcoat, a silver waistcoat. I don't know what they thought of the apparition coming in. My mother trailed around behind me saying, "Wouldn't a clarinet be nicer?"
What was it about, well, you say it was Louis Armstrong that captured you, but what was it about jazz in general that appealed to this 15-year-old boy?
On the surface of it, it was just fun. The music was just good fun. But underneath it all, I think it was the fact that jazz music always contains a hint of pain. And it was that emotional side of it, I think, underneath that I liked, because most of the music that I go for is highly emotional. And the dead of night, I've been known to sit there with not exactly in floods, but with an odd trickle from time to time, listening to music.
We're going to hear your third record now. It's not a piece of jazz. Tell us about it.
When we used to listen to Who Killed Cock Robin, and when he gets to all the birds in the air, da, 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 fellow crying and a sobbing, crying and a sobbing, I was right there with them, blubbing like a maniac.
So Gilly there bringing back memories of Port Talbot. So in the evenings then, performing in what, the working men's clubs around
We'd go
Port
down
Talbot?
to the Velindre Working Men's Club. And
you said us. Who were you?
yeah, I
With
went
your
with
cousin?
my cousin. I had a double cousin, Anthony, who was like a brother to me. His mother was my mother's sister, and his father was my father's brother.
Ah.
So we always did everything together in those days.
After your time in Wales then, you were called up to the Grenadier Guards in 1941.
Yes.
How was that then, seeing frontline? You did see frontline service at one point.
Very briefly, yes. I went to North Africa in 1943 and trained to take part in the landing at Salerno. We went on stinking old troop ships, and we heard on the way over there that Italy had surrendered. So there was a general air of celebration.
Yes.
I had my trumpet with me. I took it wherever I went. But we didn't realize that the Germans had moved in immediately that the Italians surrendered. We landed on the beachhead, and Germans cunningly allowed most of the ships to
Disgorge
disgorge
yes.
their soldiers until the beachhead was full, and then they started raining down the shells and things like that. And it was gruesome, there's no doubt about it. On the other hand, I used to jazz up the the last post. In those days, it was simply a bugle call saying, and the words that went with it were "lights out." Lights out, lights out. So people come up to me at gigs now, and they say, "I remember you at Salerno," and you think, "Oh, we're going to have some sort of horrific memories." And they say, "You used to jazz up the last post."
Your cousin Anthony, that you've described as similar to a brother to you, you were very close. He died in action during the Second
He
World War.
died in Anzio, yes.
How did you hear about that?
I heard about that when I was invalidated back home when the news came through. My father came up. I remember him coming up into my bedroom, and he was very fond of Anthony. He could barely he just sort of blurted out that Anthony had been killed. He gave me a sort of comforting, pat on the shoulder, and went out, and he was very overcome by it.
What's your fourth record then, Humphrey Lyttelton?
It's a gospel number, sung by one of the greatest of all gospel singers, Marion Williams. It was an absolute tornado of passion, and I love it.
The power and passion of Marion Williams and the Stars of Faith, and It Is Well. So, Humphrey Lyttelton, you're demobbed in 1946. You famously play outside Buckingham Palace on VE Day, and you decide then that you want to pursue art. You're going to pursue the cartooning talent that was exposed when you were at prep school in Sunningdale.
Well, it was a choice I had to make when I came out of the army. My father, I think, expected me to become a schoolmaster in his footsteps. So I went to my father, and in trepidation, because I thought he might be very disappointed. And then he asked me, what do you think you will do? So I said, well, I have two natural talents. One of them is for drawing, and the other is for music. So I went to Camberwell Art School to get a diploma in illustration, and at the same time joined a band called George Webb's Dixielanders.
Art and music, I mean, two things that are chosen, tend to be chosen by people who like to buck convention. Were you an unconventional character in your mid-20s?
So I'm told. Well, I grew a beard, for one thing. I had a rather handsome auburn beard. Didn't have any money at that time. They used to tip you for taking part in the war. You had a tip and a suit. They gave you a suit, a blue suit with a red pinstripe, dreadful things. And went along to the art school in the daytimes, and then went down to Barnhurst on Monday nights, I think it was, and played in the band.
And this idea that you were beyond convention, I mean, given that you'd come from such a conventional background, given that you were Eton educated, your father was an Eton housemaster, to be pursuing the line that you were was pretty unusual. I mean, the people who'd been with you at Eton would be going on to be clerics, or would going on to work in government, or you must have waved them all goodbye, and they must have wondered what you were up to.
I actually had quite a long depression through the process of sloughing off, as you might say, all the preparatory education that I'd had. Not necessarily what I'd learned, but all this sort of, you know, how you behaved and what you were aiming for, and to get rid of all of that, it took a long time. I mean, I'd become what I call a romantic socialist during my time in Wales. I'd had my battle dress dyed blue and wore it with a turtleneck sweater coming out underneath the battle dress, which was sort of a waist thing. My father once said to me, in that he was a bit sour about the way I was turning out. And he once said to me, I don't quite know what the association was. He said, I hope I'm not turning into one of these French socialists, all beard and belly.
Let's hear now your fifth record.
My fifth record is, it's a little bit of a narcissistic entry, because, but it's also nostalgic, because I used to know and listen to one of the Mississippi blues singers called Big Bill Brunsey, who was a fabulous guitar player and singer. And we heard that he'd got throat cancer and had had to have the whole of his voice box taken out. Terrible thing for a, you know, performer of any kind. And so I wrote a piece which was based loosely on a melody that I associated with Big Bill Blues.
He's then on the island listening to that, Humphrey, and your
your
bandmates?
If I was on the island for a very long time, it would remind me that I once used to play the trumpet.
In 1956, an extraordinary thing happened. You played with your longtime musical hero, Louis Armstrong. His description of you as Britain's top trumpeter, I mentioned it in your introduction then. How did that come about?
Well, he referred to me, I have to say at this point, that any trumpet player in any country that he ever met, he referred to as a top trumpet player. So I don't put that up as one of my sort of rosettes. But on this occasion, we were in London's Empress Hall. We were brought in a little bit late after the first concert because he came over with a variety show, including a one-legged tap dancer.
You're not making this up, are you?
I'm not making this up. He was a one-legged tap dancer called Peg Leg Bates, who was quite famous in America because he tap danced with a wooden leg. And he once said to me on one occasion that we were sitting about, because I could go into his dressing room and sit down and have a chat while we were doing the show with him. And he said, I'm doing a recording of my musical autobiography, and I'm going to tell the people that you play this number for me. And I thought, well, this is something that he says to everybody.
He died in 1971. That was about 9 years after your father died. How did Louis Armstrong's death affect you?
I have to say that it affected me more than did my own father's death, in the emotional sense, because of course there was music attached to it as well, and I've talked about the emotion of music, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life. I was absolutely knocked sideways by it. Louis Armstrong's death, because it was such a complete part of one's life, affected people, you know, all over the place, not just myself.
So your sixth record then, it really has to be Louis Armstrong?
Yes, indeed. And it'll recollect one of those moments when we saw him off at, I think it was King's Cross Station, and we set up on one of those huge great baggage trucks. So we set up outside his carriage. He got into his seat. We played one tune. We played another tune. And another tune after that. And it went on. The train was 15 or 20 minutes late in pulling out of the station. And I remember I played this number, That's My Home, as part of that farewell. And he hopped across the carriage and he opened those little windows that you could open on one of those carriages, and he got his head half out and he sang the words of this song. And that'll be a fantastic memory to keep.
And people should listen out in listening to this for Louis Armstrong's tribute within it to you, Humphrey Lyttelton.
Yes, I dismissed the idea and then he came up with this.
At my farewell party after my last trip to England, Humphrey Lyttelton, who's the top trumpet man in England today, he played this tune for me.
So, Humphrey, your music career is very well established by, well, we're at the early 70s now. 1972, you are asked to do a pilot program, a radio pilot program. You already have your radio program on Radio 2 going strong, your jazz program. Why did they ask you to do, I'm sorry, I haven't a clues pilot anyway?
Well, I'd done quite a few pilots over the years, because anybody who ever spoke for any length of time on radio, eventually asked to do a pilot, and he got paid a studio fee, and he went home and never heard anything about it forever.
The conspiracy with us, the audience, is almost irresistible as a listener. You know, you've got the games with, as we say, no apparent rules. You've got the wonderful character of Samantha, who I always imagine is very buxom for some reason. And she's your sex-obsessed assistant. There's the non-existent high-tech laser display board that gives some of the clues to the contestants. That's the appeal as a listener. What's the appeal as a performer?
It's just such fun to do because we all get on well together. Because I got my persona on the programme from how I felt when they rung me up and said, it's going ahead, back in 1972, and it's going on the air. And I drove in for the first recording then, thinking, what the hell am I doing? You know, I've got a perfectly good career. I'm not strapped for money particularly, and I just don't know what I'm doing here. And I've kept that thought to the forefront of my mind all the way through.
What's your seventh record?
My seventh record arises from something that I discovered. People have said to me, and I've never recognized it myself, that there's something about my timing. But in point of fact, somebody sent me an LP of one of the old Kenneth Horne shows, Round the Horn. And I always used to listen to that when it was a regular broadcast, and then I'd forgotten about it. I suddenly realized that I recognized in Kenneth Horne's approach to the thing something of what I do. And so I've realized that he was a huge influence on me. It may be due to the fact that I'm alleged to be on the posh side, and he was also posh. And so he was doing much the same thing that I was doing, you know, slumming.
And now, Kenneth Horne, Master Spy. My lean brown body scythed into the limpid blue water. I turned over on my back and floated lazily, and then adjusting my snorkel, I plunged below the surface. Suddenly, I saw it coming towards me, a killer shark. I slipped off the safety catch of my harpoon and pulled the trigger. The deadly trident cleaved through the water and buried its fangs in the hide of the monster. I was safe. I could breathe easily again. I surfaced, pulled out the plug, and got out of the bath. As the water gurgled down the plug hole, it left a ring. I answered it immediately. Hello, this is your friendly neighborhood spy, huh?
Oh, Mr. Horne, thank heavens you're there. Sob, sob, gasp, gasp. I'm in terrible trouble. Gulp, gulp, sob, gasp. I'm in the apartment opposite.
Would you come across?
Drop of a hat. But right now, Mr. Horne, I'm desperate. I came home 5 minutes ago to find my father, the well-known atomic scientist, missing, the butler and maid dead, and the chauffeur has disappeared.
Why are you phoning me?
Well, you know how bored you can get on your own. I thought a bit of company would be nice.
I'll be over immediately.
I thought you'd never get here. I'm Dr. Sigmund Eyre's daughter, Frida. Free to my friends.
Oh, I see. Free air.
Yes, but you have to buy 4 gallons.
Kenneth Horne with Betty Marsden from Round the Horn. So, Humphrey Lyttelton, you've had these two wonderful careers in jazz and radio that we've been talking about. But in the middle of this, of course, you were a father, grandfather, and indeed a great-grandfather. Your wife, presumably, was instrumental in keeping the whole show on the road at home.
Indeed, yes. There is an innate selfishness about, I might say, the performing arts, in the sense that it does absorb you and it takes you away from home. But if you're lucky, and I was, your wife manages to build her own career, apart from bringing up the children. She was a jazz fan, but she didn't like everything that I did, so that she would come occasionally to a concert and that kind of thing, but she didn't live that terrible life of a band wife, trailing along behind her husband.
And your wife died earlier this year. How do you think you would handle what would be the inevitable loneliness on a desert island? Do you think you'd be able to cope with that?
I've been used to loneliness ever since I got on my bike and pedalled away from my sister's terrible friends in childhood. And I've spent a lot of time on my own. And the circumstances of when my wife died, I looked after her for a long, long time, which is a lonely experience in itself. So, you know, and also I've got two families. How lovely to have two families. My own blood family and the band, which is like a family.
Tell us about your 8th record.
Next record will bring a little gaiety into my life. There's been some quite sad things in my music. I've always had a wish that I'd learned to play the piano and had been able to play it like Fats Waller. And also the fact that song pluggers used to go around in the 30s giving people sentimental songs to sing. And why they ever went in a studio where Fats Waller was, I don't know. Because he used to slaughter them. And as he does indeed with a thing called It's a Sin.
A lie. So you've got Shakespeare and the Bible on this island, Humphrey Lyttelton. There is one other book allowed. What would that book be?
Being interested as I am in cartooning and in humorous writing, I would take the collected works of James Thurber, the American cartoonist and humorist, who I find extremely funny. I haven't read all his stuff, but as a writer, I think he's even funnier than he was as a cartoonist.
What luxury item would you have?
Well, I think I'd have to take a keyboard, and then I could really get down to learning how to play like Fats Waller. But the keyboard that I think I should have, because I can't plug anything into the
No,
sound.
we don't give you electricity.
I know, and batteries, I mean, I can't take all that.
Too useful.
Too useful. So I'm going to have a harmonium. You sit at it pedaling and playing lovely music.
And if the waves should crash onto the shore and attempt to wash away your collection of 8 records, which one would you run through the sand to save?
Got to be the Louis Armstrong. It's got to be the Louis Armstrong, because I think, you know, your emotions have got to be stirred regularly, otherwise you just become a boring old castaway.
Humphrey Lyttelton, thank you very much for letting us hear your Desert Island Discs.
Producer is Leanne Buckle. Humph Sunday continues after the news when Stephen Fry presents Chairman Humph, a tribute, which includes recollections from some of the regular panellists on I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. And later there's a chance to hear Humphrey Lyttelton himself presenting a portrait of one of his musical heroes, Louis Prima, the King of the Swingers, is this afternoon at 1:30. Now on Radio 4, Stephen Fry presents Chairman Humph, a tribute.
1921. It was the year that Einstein was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics. Swedish women got the right to vote, and the first Miss America pageant was held in Atlantic City. And, in the cloistered courts of Eton College, Humphrey Richard Adine Lyttelton, jazz band leader, broadcaster and journalist, better known to us simply and fondly as Humph, was born on the 23rd of May. So began a long life and a sparkling career. He touched the lives of many, and for those fortunate enough to know him and to work with him, he left a lasting impression, often from the very first moment of meeting.
I can remember when I first met Humph. It was 1955, yawn with your mouths closed. He was my friend for 53 years, in every sense one of my oldest friends, and I was singing with Leeds Uni Jazz Band. And typical courtesy, he came over and said hello to me, and I thought, oh, it's him. And then I floated away on a pink cloud. He said, I heard you singing with the band. And then with an enchanting smile, he said, it wasn't difficult. You're quite loud.
I suppose he came into my life when I was a teenager, and I used to buy his records and dance to him in the Buxton Pavilion Gardens very badly. But I reminded him of that, and he just laughed for a long time at the thought of me dancing to him.
I first met Humph at the pilot for I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, and it was great to see him and think, wow, it's really him. He's going to do it. And he did it brilliantly, and it was terrific fun just sitting watching him be chairman.
My wife met him first, actually, when she was 15, and she was going with a master at the school to see a Humph, and obviously knew someone in the band. And the person in the band made a big play for my wife, who was only 15, and Humph stood in and said, leave her alone, she's far too good for you. And she reminded him recently, said, yes, I know who that would have been. So he was a gentleman in every way.
There's a sort of an embarrassing thing about becoming aware of Humphrey, which is that I didn't grow up in this country, and so the great legacy of Humph's music and his appearances on I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue had frankly passed me by, and I'm really glad that I didn't know how astonishing he was and what a fantastic comic honour it was to appear on the programme, because I think it would never have turned up, and I certainly wouldn't have turned up in quite the jolly and jovial manner that I did. And it wasn't until I'd been doing it for a bit that I thought, oh, this is part of an astonishing piece of British culture, and that man in charge is a national treasure.
Humph came from a distinguished family, and even if you didn't know that his cousin was the 10th Viscount Cobham, Humph's tall, effortlessly patrician bearing placed him unmistakably amongst the ranks of the gentry.
I was never really aware of Humph's sort of aristocratic background until we did a show at Malvern, and Humph explained that actually a lot of the land round there was owned by his family.
The ancient county of Worcestershire has much to admire, including Hagley Hall, the family seat of the Lyttelton dynasty. Set in 350 acres of superbly landscaped deer park, the house contains Van Dyck masterpieces and fine Chippendale furniture. The land, house and title have passed down the line to my cousin, Viscount Cobham, the 8th Lord Lyttelton, and his heirs, reminding me that at any given time I am but one small and entirely fatal minibus accident away from wealth, privilege and complete idleness beyond my wildest dreams.
That was one of Humph's introductory remarks from the antidote to panel games, I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. Recording the programme took him all over the country during his 36 years as chairman, a role in which he took a quiet pride, although he was often at pains to conceal it.
Listen, I'll tell you something. If on May the 23rd, 1921, I'd ever thought that I would live to sit here reading all this codswallop, I'd have turned around and gone right back in.
Tony Hawks.
He never came across as a very upper-class, posh guy to me, and I guess that was because of his background in jazz, that he'd gone from this world where perhaps a family might be expecting you to be a lawyer or a judge or a doctor, and he'd gone into this world where in dingy clubs playing jazz, surrounded by people that would have brought him back down to earth if he'd got to up himself, I suppose. So he was a mixture. Yes, he had a well-spoken voice, but I didn't know that he was from that background, and there were no clues in the way he behaved.
He seemed to have inherited all the good things about the so-called upper classes and none of the bad things. He wasn't stuck in a rut, but he did care about other people and look after other people. So he had the best of both worlds, I think.
Humph rarely spoke of his aristocratic connections and certainly never boasted of them. However, when the show was recorded at the National Theatre's Lyttelton Auditorium, mention of his distinguished relative was unavoidable.
The National actually comprises 3 stage venues: the Olivier, which is named after Sir Laurence Olivier, the Cottesloe, which isn't named after Sir Laurence Olivier, and our venue today, the Lyttelton, named after a relative of mine, Oliver Lyttelton, 1st Viscount Chandos and the theatre's first chairman. Oliver, or Uncle Viscount Chandos, as I knew him, joined the government in 1940 when a House of Commons seat was found for him at Aldershot, which explains why he had to shout during Prime Minister's question time. In his capacity as head of non-ferrous metals, Oliver organised the war effort campaign to collect pots, pans and kettles for the RAF. But Bomber Command found that dropping high explosives was more effective.
In fact, he did have one ancestor with whom he shared his name and who was a source of mischievous pride.
Guy Fawkes was born in New York. In 1606, he was hung, drawn and quartered at Tyburn and buried at Marble Arch, Cheapside, Ludgate and Wandsworth. His co-conspirators included one Humphrey Lyttelton, who was dragged in chains to Guildford and publicly executed. Imagine the shame brought upon my family. Apparently they were okay about publicly executed, but Guildford...
The infant Lyttelton spent his early years living at Eton College, where his father, the Honourable G.W. Lyttelton, second son of the 8th Viscount Cobham, was a housemaster. There he enjoyed a life, if not exactly sprawling in the lap of luxury, at least comfortably supported in the style of the upper middle class.
You know, I remember Nanny repeatedly pulling my trousers down to give me a good smack on the bottom, and it never did me any harm. Although it did make me late getting here this afternoon.
After a few years at Sunningdale Preparatory School, he naturally became a pupil at Eton College, where his father taught. And as with all Etonians, Humph discovered that great things were expected of him.
But a stone's throw across the river is Eton with its world-renowned school. According to my guide notes, Eton's most famous former pupils include the Duke of Wellington, William Gladstone, George Orwell, and Humphrey Lyttelton, the jazz musician and panel game host. They don't say what those other three are famous for.
For an edition of the South Bank Show, first broadcast in 2007, Humph returned to Eton, accompanied by Melvyn Bragg.
I don't know whether he was very keen on talking much about Eton. I don't think he was, really. And you felt, not that he resented it or anything, but he was way away in his past, and he was puzzled that he'd ever been there at all. I felt. What warmed him up was the Eton Jazz Band, the boys there now, turned up most incongruously in their full dress, and they did a session together. And he was absolutely away, and they were away. And then we went into another building, and at the top of the stairs was a very good portrait of him, almost a full-length portrait, really good, when he was quite a young man, so it must have been 30, and he'd never seen it. And you thought, he's never bothered to come to see it. It's and I felt that was really stylish. Never rushed to see it. He said, oh, yes. Oh, they said it was good. It's pretty good, isn't it? Yeah. And then he wandered on from there.
One endearing quality Humph seemed to have acquired from his time at Eton was not, as you might expect, a sense of superiority or of belonging to some kind of elite. Rather, it was his unwillingness to be impressed by rank or title.
I'm just thinking, I was in the sixth form at Eton, and I seem to have missed out somewhere.
Were you a fag?
I was Lord Carrington's fag.
Good
and I
gracious.
told an interviewer on American television, coast to coast. And the late Liberace was on the phone before I got out of the studio.
Humph had time for everybody.
Barry Cryer.
Everybody was treated the same. There was no discrimination between who he was talking to or what. I'll tell you a story. Our grandson, Evan, who was then 8, was studying the trumpet, and Humph and the band played Harrow Arts Centre, which is the bottom of our road in Hatch End. And Evan and his dad, our eldest son, and a whole gang of us went down to see the band. Evan had no idea who Humphrey Lyttelton was, although his dad probably filled him in on the details. And this 8-year-old was riveted and hypnotised by this tall old man playing the trumpet. And he wanted a pee, Evan, but he wouldn't go for one. He was determined to see the whole show. And then we took him round to meet Humph, and Humph unbent from his great height. Good evening, Evan. Oh, I see you've got your trumpet book with you. Typically, Humph, he didn't say, do you want me to sign it? He said to Evan, may I sign your book? And Evan's spellbound by this man, so Humph starts inscribing in this book. And someone came up to Humph to speak to him, and with great charm and gentleness, he waved them away. Excuse me, I'm talking. He's talking to an 8-year-old boy. And then we saw what he'd put in the book. He'd drawn a trumpeter, and the inscription was, to Evan, from one trumpeter to another. That was Humph, the way he behaved with an 8-year-old boy.
It was at Eton that he developed his love for jazz. Thrilled by hearing recordings of Louis Armstrong, he obtained his first trumpet in 1936. While visiting London to watch the annual Eton-Harrow cricket match at Lord's, he persuaded his mother to sneak him out of the ground to a shop in the Charing Cross Road, where he bought an instrument for £5. Back at school, after teaching himself how to play, he soon formed his first band in 1936, which included future journalist Ludovic Kennedy on drums.
Because he had this marvellous hinterland of a life, long before he ever did Clue. I mean, he was about 50 when he started doing Clue. And jazz was the very core of his being, his passion. That was number one in his life. He just loved it, loved it.
After leaving school, Humph spent 18 months working in the steelworks at Port Talbot. The idea was to find out if he had the makings of a captain of industry, but the experience left him with the lifelong convictions of what he called a romantic socialist.
Humph made me enormously welcome.
Rob Brydon.
I know when I sang Delilah, which I think was the first song I sang on there, many times in future shows he told me how moved he'd been by that because of time he'd spent in Port Talbot, which is where I'm from. He was a young man and he was sent on some kind of work experience to the steelworks, and it was that experience that actually informed his political viewpoint and left him with a real fondness for Port Talbot. And I sort of feel that I benefited greatly from that, because he always used to look very, very kindly on me. And Humph looking over at you when you'd said something funny was very gratifying.
The Second World War found him serving in the Grenadier Guards. Humph was typically reticent about recounting his wartime experiences, though he would often recall how he waded ashore during the Allied landings at Salerno in September 1943, brandishing a pistol in one hand and his trumpet in the other. When the war ended, Humph celebrated VE Night, dressed in his officer's mess uniform, blowing lustily on his trumpet as he was wheeled round the West End in a handcart to the gates of Buckingham Palace. Fortunately, the event is preserved in the BBC sound archives.
Well, the crowd, I can watch them up the Mall. They're pouring into this great space in front of the forecourt. And there's a trumpet playing now somewhere down below me. And as the crowd swirls, eddies, and waits, we must take our last look at this wonderful scene, this great tribute to the King and Queen, who have so nobly borne the hardships and trials of their people in this civilian war. And so we take our last look at this occasion on this most historic night.
Following demobilisation after the war, he attended Camberwell College of Arts for 2 years. There he met up with clarinetist Wally Fawkes, also known as the cartoonist Trog, and together they worked at the Daily Mail, most notably on the cartoon strip Fluke. Humph's band became established in the 1950s and made its home at 100 Oxford Street, a shabby but enormous basement room where twice a week there were queues round the block. Originally pioneering the revival of traditional jazz, Humph was always looking for ways to develop, as when he changed his lineup, dropping the banjo and trombone and introducing the saxophone, moving the repertoire towards the swing styles of the 1930s and 40s. This annoyed some purists, although anyone familiar with Humph's personal musical taste might assume he did it just to get rid of the banjo. In 1956, he had his only commercial hit with the recording of his own composition, Bad Penny Blue. In the late 1990s, producer John Naismith received an appeal from Radiohead, the internationally renowned indie band. They wanted to enlist Humph's assistance on a track called Life in a Glass House, feeling it would benefit from a touch of New Orleans jazz. John urged Humph to do the gig, and after listening to Radiohead's album OK Computer, borrowed from one of his grandchildren, Humph agreed.
I wrote a grovelling letter to Humph asking him to help us out with this song that we thought would work in a Dixieland style.
Johnny Greenwood, songwriter and instrumentalist with the band Radiohead.
And what was great about the session was that he came along with his band, and we were very anxious, obviously, about playing, and they were just sat around drinking real ales, I think, and got a great reaction, and rightly so, really. You know, a great band, amazing band. Yeah, that was a really happy day.
Music was always at the centre of Humph's life, whether playing it or presenting it on his Radio 2 show, The Best of Jazz. Louis Armstrong, who became a friend, said he was Britain's best trumpeter, referring to him as that cat in England who swings his ass off. He had other interests, of course, and indeed other careers as a cartoonist and journalist. From his father, he inherited a love of calligraphy, and he was a committed bird watcher.
Okay, it's time for the roundabout chat-up lines and their place in the fascinating world of I'll tell you what, I've got to tell you this.
True story, isn't it?
True story. You know, when you think of a witticism only 24 hours too late, you all have that. I was being interviewed by a guy in Scotland called Jack something or other. And he started the interview, because one of my hobbies listed is in my thing is bird watching, see. So he said, I hear that you're a bit of an ornithologist. And halfway down the M6 the next day, I thought I should have said, not so much an ornithologist, more of a word botcher. Anyway.
He was a member of, or even president of, the Calligraphy Society, and I had to write a few notes to him occasionally. I was just to type them in the end, because I just didn't want him seeing my terrible scrawl. But if somebody would ask for an autograph, he would always sign it, but it wouldn't just be a... It would be almost as if it was being sculpted in stone, and it was just beautiful.
In 1971, Humph unexpectedly discovered another string to his trumpet. He was invited to take the chair for the pilot episode of a sort of panel game which had been spun off from the radio comedy series I'm Sorry I'll Read That Again. It was called I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. Graham Garden, having noticed that a lot of radio game shows relied on people being entertaining as they played simple party games, wondered what would happen if a bunch of comedy writer performers was let loose in a format where the games were ridiculous and in some cases completely baffling. He pitched the idea to the BBC, and when he and the producer David Hatch met to choose a chairman for the pilot show, they discovered that each had the name Humphrey Lyttelton at the top of his list.
Round one, using the word in the widest possible sense, is a musical round. Each team has the words of a well-known song, which I'm going to ask them to sing to the wrong tune.
I can't sing them to the right tune.
So, first of all, Graham and Joe will sing the words of Three Blind Mice, which have just been handed to them, and they're going to sing them, please, to the tune of Old Man River.
Three blind mice, three blind mice, see how they run, see how they run.
At the end of the improvised pilot, Humph and the players, Tim Brooke-Taylor, Graham Garden, Bill Oddie and Joe Kendall, adjourned to a pub where they agreed it had been a dreadful experience and vowed never again. When David Hatch was asked whether there was any hope of their efforts reaching the air, he replied, none, except possibly after lunch on Boxing Day when the listeners are all pissed. In the event, and to everyone's surprise, Tony Whitby, the head of Radio 4, liked what he heard and commissioned a first series, which began its run in February 1972. So Humph, always an entertaining speaker and amusing commentator, entered the world of comedy. Not as a comedian as such, although it might have been fun to see him perform a set as a stand-up.
You know, the staff of a sewage farm in the northwest of England went on a day's outing to Blackpool, and one of them was overcome by the fresh air and fainted. Took 7 buckets of shit to bring him round.
For many years, Clue was recorded at the Paris Theatre in London. Then, in the early 1990s, it was decided to take the show on the road. And from then on, the recordings took place at a series of major theatres all over the country, where Humph and the teams were welcomed by enthusiastic local audiences.
Hello. Hello and welcome to I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue. You find us today at the Theatre Royal in Nottingham, a fine city with a fascinating history. The legendary people's hero Robin Hood spent his life nearby. He famously, on his deathbed, shot an arrow from his bow, asking that wherever in Sherwood Forest the arrow should land, there he should be laid to rest, and the whole area covered with an enormous plastic bubble for visitors to ride bikes and play bingo. It's well documented in official records that the city's original name was Snottingham, or Home of Snots. But when the Normans came, they couldn't pronounce the letter S, so decreed the town be called Nottingham, or the Home of Knots. It's easy to understand why this change was resisted so fiercely by the people of Scunthorpe.
The show's travels gave the writer Ian Pattinson the opportunity to provide Humph with brilliantly fresh material week after week.
As a professional gag writer, to be chosen to write for Humphrey Lyttelton on I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue was like being chosen to play football for England, except when they were good, to win the British Grand Prix, to score the winning run in the best test match ever. It's that equivalent. Plenty of times I've been at the odd BBC function. People have come to find me to say, I just wanted to meet someone who writes for Humphrey Lyttelton.
Originally called Hampton, or large village, the name Northampton stems from the Viking occupation when it became Norsehampton. It was in 973 AD that the Saxon King Edgar regained the town from the Norse King Gudrun and freed its captive womenfolk, who were all highly impressed with his victory proclamation, I have the Hampton of a Norse.
To hear Humph reading your script and then to hear that fantastic audience reaction is something that other gag writers would kill for. And I first noticed with the first few shows I wrote, which I didn't get to the recording, and I heard my script coming out on the radio, and it seemed to be about 3 times funnier than I thought it was on the page. And I have to say, up to that point, I'd been writing for 4 or 5 years then, up to that point, it had generally been the other way round.
Birmingham is proud to be the home of HP Sauce. In celebration of 100 years of production, in 1998, the Queen Mother visited to address workers at the HP factory. Her Majesty was a little frail and unable to get her words out, so they turned her upside down and smacked her on the bottom.
Guest panellist Jack D.
Ian Pattinson, who wrote for Humph for a long time and wrote all the introductions and the links, is a brilliant writer and consistently came up with very, very funny intros and monologues for Humph to do. But what was extraordinary about seeing that process happening was that Humph really, I don't think he ever questioned a line of it. He'd literally get it, sort of mumble it through to himself as he was by way of rehearsal, and then read it on stage and make it work brilliantly well. And I think part of the magic of that was that he simply didn't appear to really care either way. He did care, but he had that great way with his delivery of relaxing the audience, because it didn't seem to matter that much to Humph whether it was funny or not. And of course, that's half the secret. Once you've got the audience relaxed and confident that you're going to be funny and that they're not going to be embarrassed by the whole process, then you've already got an audience that are going to enjoy everything an awful lot more.
At the far end of the Royal Mile is Holyrood House and Queen Mary's Bath. History records it's here that Queen Mary bathed up to her waist in fine claret. One courtier who tasted the wine had difficulty describing its flavour, saying there was a hint of something he couldn't put his finger on.
Long-standing panellist Jeremy Hardy.
Nobody could deliver a line like Humph could. I mean, given a script, he just made it beautiful. I mean, people act scripts, they say scripts, they deliver things, and Humph just inhabited this script. He just lived it, and just did everything perfectly with delightful timing and added his own flourishes.
Frequent panellist Andy Hamilton.
I suspect that some of the timing was sort of inextricably linked to his musicality, but I think there was also a kind of relaxation in him. He always seemed to have a lot of time, you know, and some of those pauses that he used to exploit after a particularly stupid game ended on I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. And he was like a sort of he was like, you know, you see some sportsmen who you know are a lot better than everybody else because they always seem to have more time to play their shots, and I always felt that about Humph, really.
Graham Garden.
A lot of people have said that his timing was like jazz timing. I think he was right, because for a start he listened, and if you play jazz or improvise in any way, you've got to listen, and that's the mark of a good chairman. I mean, I think too many shows have suffered chairmen who drive the programme forward without really listening to what's going on and not kind of responding and keeping the ball bouncing. But Humph listened, and if you hear a jazz band in full flight, everyone is listening. You hear somebody comes up with a phrase, it's echoed, it's responded to, it bounces around. And Humph could do that. He then turned this idea completely on its head by pretending not to listen. And of course, that was, although he was obviously listening very carefully, that was equally funny. But he knew exactly what was going on, exactly what he was doing.
There was such a lack of desperation about Humph, which is great in an entertainer, great in a comedian who is not bothered, who does not have to do it, who's not trying to get anywhere. This isn't a rung on his ladder. He's not worried about how many people are listening to the show. He's doing it for fun, absolutely for fun. And that's so liberating for him and so liberating for the show, and made it so much fun for everybody else.
Dame Judi Dench once appeared on the show in a round called Celebrity What's My Line, in which the teams had to guess what she did for a living.
When I did the programme, I was absolutely fascinated just before it to see him sitting in a chair looking at the script, because what you actually hear is somebody totally ad-libbing and not prepared. It's that ability of being able to be unbelievably witty, and yet you think none of that was rehearsed or prepared.
On a typical recording day, the teams would meet up at midday and spend the afternoon doing what preparation they could for the show. Curiously, Chairman Humph, the man in charge, was probably the least prepared of all the participants. He would arrive an hour or two before the show began to read through the script on the cards he was provided with, and of course from time to time things would go wrong.
So in an effort to reverse the decline in letter writing, I'd like the teams to construct a series of correspondence between certain famous people from the past.
A little bit of a change of plan here.
Sorry. It's not your son, it's Mr. Naismith, the producer.
Can you read that? Sorry.
No.
It seems to say the building is on fire, but don't alarm the audience.
Sorry.
Barry and Graham. I have dreams like this.
I wondered why you weren't wearing any trousers.
Germaine Greer.
There were lots of things about him as a chairman. One is his affectation that he was really terribly bored by the whole thing. Then there was the affectation that he couldn't really understand what it was that he was saying, except of course he could understand Mornington Crescent, which no one else can understand. And the ongoing joke about poor old Colin Sell and what a terrible musician he was, which is copied by Edna Everidge with Madge, her bridesmaid. Much funnier when it's done by Humphrey, especially as Colin Sell is very good at what he does. But it would have been really pathetic to have said, here is our fantastic musical maestro. You know, I think one of the things one loved about it is it was so un-American. The Americans would never get it.
Humph certainly relished his completely fictitious ongoing feud with long-suffering pianist Colin Sell. Their frosty onstage relationship was merely an extension of the chairman's general contempt for the show's proceedings.
You may be interested to know that Colin's musical influences are in fact Middle Eastern in origin. Mainly Shiite.
I think he said himself once that his relationship with Colin Sell, who he never stopped insulting, was a squire and his gardener. Humph loved sending up his own heritage, you know, Etonian and Toff and all that. He loved playing on that.
A member of the opposing team may challenge by using his buzzer. Do please remember that excessive buzzing is likely to drown out the accompaniment provided by Colin Sell. Another good way is to use a pneumatic drill. Now then, the song.
Pianist Colin Sell.
Everybody has said to me, it must be awful being insulted like that, and because it's not. I mean, firstly, Humph and I were the best of friends, and secondly, just to be mentioned at all by that man was wonderful. So it didn't matter in the slightest. I mean, I knew there was no malice in it, and it upped my profile in a kind of rather loony way.
Round 7, Swanee Kazoo. Yes, it's time now for another.
All you have to say is piano accompaniment will be provided by Colin Sell.
Can I say it through clenched teeth?
Would you pass him his teeth, John?
He said, I was out playing with a band last night, and a man came up to me afterwards looking very serious, and I thought, oh dear, perhaps he didn't like the music. He said to Humph, Mr. Lyttelton, may I ask you a question in strictest confidence? And Humph said, yes, of course you can. And he said, do Colin Sell and Samantha really exist? So Humph said to him, Samantha does. And the man went away perfectly happy.
Humph's style was once described as innuendo-prone, which neatly conveys the idea that double entendres somehow lay in wait and would leap out to ambush him in the midst of some innocent preamble. He would affect to ignore these unwelcome intruders, if indeed he noticed them at all. The audience, on the other hand, would often disgrace themselves by finding indelicate meanings in the chairman's remarks about his winsome assistant Samantha, or while introducing the round sound charades.
As a matter of fact, Samantha's just started keeping bees and already has 3 dozen or so. She says she's got an expert handler coming round to give a demonstration. He'll carefully take out her 38 bees and soon have them flying round his head. Okay, the teams are going to exercise their mime skills now in the game called Sound Charades. This is based on the popular TV classic Give Us a Clue, where players enacted the title of a film or a book or a play without speaking and within a strict time limit. The expert's expert was, of course, Lionel Blair. Who can ever forget opposing team captain Eunice Stubbs sitting open-mouthed as he tried to pull off 12 angry men in under 2 minutes.
For someone who had done more than enough to be celebrated as a national treasure, Humph hated to be thought of as a celebrity. He would delight in any script that debunked our current celebrity culture.
Right, in this next round, the teams are going to delve into the world of real celebrities. The cult of the celebrity is everywhere, with many lending their image to the promotion of consumer goods. I noticed recently on my pack of sausages a picture of Anthony Worrell Thompson in his kitchen. Underneath it said, "Prick with a fork."
When Alan Titchmarsh appeared in the round Celebrity What's My Line, Humph was surprised that the guest had actually made the effort to travel all the way to the recording at Broadcasting House.
Are you getting Titchmarsh back again?
No, he's gone home to Hampshire.
To Hampshire?
Yes, he lives in Hampshire. Come all the way from Hampshire.
What a fool. I come all the way from Barnet and I feel an idiot.
Unflappability was another of Chairman Humph's great attributes. During a break in a recording session at Brighton's Theatre Royal, proceedings were rudely interrupted. John Naismith.
The theatre had a special deal with the Grand Hotel in Brighton. And I remember also that day there'd been a thunderstorm forecast, and I was a bit concerned about maybe there'd be heavy rain and might this affect recording, and nobody seemed to know. Anyway, the recording went without event and there was no sort of rain to be heard. But after the second recording, I was showing the audience a brand new compilation audio cassette when suddenly there was the most enormous clap of thunder.
Basically what it is an audio cassette issued by the BBC Radio Collection, which is available for a mere £7.99.
Oh, I don't believe
That
it.
Yes.
Presumably is just one cassette, John.
Yes, you would perhaps think, but oh no.
Sorry, I didn't mean it.
Oh dear. Terrible trouble.
I knew we shouldn't have stayed at the Grand Hotel.
At least we'll all go down to breakfast together.
As the years went by, age became an issue. Humph hated the assumptions people made about the more mature citizen. In his 80s, he took great exception to being patronised at the checkout in supermarkets, while he was still perfectly capable of broadcasting as sharply and confidently as ever. When asked if he felt old, he remarked, "I'm 40 on stage and 120 in Waitrose." None of this stopped septuagenarian Barry Cryer from teasing him.
Okay, we start this week with a round of inadvisable openings, in which the teams suggest rejected opening lines for various books. I'll say that again. In which the teams suggest... Do you see what I'm doing? It's what's known as self-editing. Because there's usually somebody, I don't know who he is.
It's the producer, Mr. Naismith. It's not your son.
And you are?
Ian Pattinson.
There was one intro I can recall where I deliberately didn't put any jokes in it, which was Hunt the Slipper. It's this stupid arcane game from the 1920s, 30s. And it was such a stupid game. I thought, this doesn't really need a joke, so I'll just describe the game.
In Hunt the Slipper, I'll sit with my eyes closed while the slipper is passed around behind the team's backs. After a few seconds slipper passing, I shall call out, "Slipper search on." And then I'll open my eyes. Obviously, I will have no idea where the slipper is, but the team should keep passing the slipper around secretly, and I shall have to guess who is holding the slipper and challenge them by pointing and calling out, "Slipper holder." I'm 78, for Christ's sake.
Melvyn Bragg.
Another thing that was unmistakable was this charm. And you can't put that on. You really can't. And it's not all that common. But when somebody's got it, it's completely beguiling. And he was a charming man.
If you watched Humph in action, it was a kind of object lesson in style and manners. I went to see him perform with his jazz band in Canizaro Park last summer. It was a nice summer's evening, but once the sun went down, it turned bitterly cold. And Humph finished the show at about 10:30, and then hundreds of people wanted him to sign cassettes or sign their autograph book, and they queued up and they queued and they queued, and he sat there, freezing cold, I'm sure, in his mid-80s, and at any moment I expected him to break off and just say, "Well, do you mind, only it's awfully cold, I'd like to go inside." But he didn't. He spoke to everybody in turn, and I think he was there for over an hour. And, watching him do that, I thought it's just a shame that so few people handle their success with as much elegance as that.
In the last year of Humphrey's life, we embarked on a theatrical tour, a curious thing to start doing after, 36 years of the programme. And I'm very glad we did do that tour, because it was a sort of lap of honour for Humph. And what was lovely at the end of those shows, Humphrey would close the show by playing on his trumpet, "We'll Meet Again." And at one of the last dates we did, the Hammersmith Apollo, this huge venue, 3,500 people, there was something rather magical about that evening. Humphrey played the same piece beautifully, and in the most extraordinary fashion, 3,500 people, as one, stood on their feet and applauded him. And it has been imbued with so much more impact, knowing that within a matter of weeks, days after that show, he died. It's a wonderful farewell, and I will treasure that memory of 3,500 people standing up as one.
Humph left his mark on all of us, those who knew and worked with him, and those who delighted in his music and his broadcasts. He gave us all so much to admire and to enjoy and to remember. I know that I've always thought that when I grow up I would like nothing more than to be like Humph.
He'll be remembered for his comedy and his wit and his brilliant delivery. His timing was I think, is something that will become legendary, probably, certainly amongst my generation of comedians who really loved him.
I'll miss him badly, because there's no one left like him at all. But I also think there never was anybody like him either. I think you could say that he is the comic of the people who do cryptic crosswords, because he would use a perfectly ordinary word in a completely salacious sense and get away with it because of his clergyman-like cool.
He was an institution, and I don't see that the gap he's left will ever be filled. The intonation of some of his remarks in I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue, I shall never forget the rest of my life. And he had impeccable manners, which also somehow, he didn't let boil to the surface, his manners. You just knew he had wonderfully good manners. And at the same time, he was very rude. Oh, it's irresistible.
I think old musicians don't die, they just fade away, particularly somebody of his standing. I think he will be remembered as long as people are going to remember all the jazz greats, which is going to be what? Just forever.
He'll be remembered as the creator of that role of the modern panel game chairman. Never mind the buzzcocks, they think it's all over. All these panel games, that style of chairmanship comes from Humphrey Lyttelton.
Humph will be remembered with enormous affection. The trouble is that all these words have been used up on other dead people. He was a national treasure. He was our greatest living Englishman. He was enormously charming, very, very warm, very private but strangely open. You got his full attention.
I will never forgive him. He did something totally out of character. He died, and he's left a big gap, and I will never forgive him. God bless him.
There are a lot of moving things about Humph dying, and so many people coming up to you and saying, gosh, he must be a loss, which of course he is. But apart from the trumpet solo, the most moving of all was that people were apparently leaving flowers at Mornington Crescent. Now, oof.
I think the thing I admired about him, and which I would like to feel I could take away with me, I think it would be his energy and his hatred of idleness. For such a vigorous and energetic man, I think the fact that he was working right up to the end is probably as good a way as he would have wished to go. And my wife put it rather beautifully, I thought, at the funeral. She said to me, well, he died while he was still tall.
Humph is irreplaceable. And the interesting thing for somebody who's passed away is I think he'll be remembered alive. I think his music stays with us. Wonderful recordings of him playing his trumpet, either with his band or with the rest of us on kazoo. I think the splendid collections of I'm Sorry I Haven't a Clue will live on for other generations. And we used to, at the end of recordings, sing We'll Meet Again. And he was a humanist and I am certainly not religious in any way, but I hope we're both wrong, and I hope that someday we will meet again.
Well, as the vanquished charwoman of time begins to shake and vac the shag pile of eternity. I notice that we've just run out of time.
Chairman Humph, a tribute, was written by Graham Garden and produced by John Naismith and Claire Jones.
Well, now the late Humphrey Lyttelton presents a portrait of one of his musical heroes, a man they used to call the wildest, but who is now better known as the King of the Swingers. This is the story of Louis Prima.
They would send their cartoonists to capture all of his movements, his mannerisms, his facial expressions, so that by the time they created this character of King Louis, you saw
pioneer at least 3 major musical revolutions: swing, big band, and rock and roll. In the course of doing so, he wrote songs that have been performed by big bands, doo-wop groups, country singers, almost every style of music you can think of. I've even heard Colin Sell attempting to pick out Please No Squeezer da Banana on the piano. So why is so proficient a musician remembered more for one supporting cartoon role than for the whole of a vast musical back catalogue? After all, it's still as infectious today as it was back in his heyday.
Louis Prima's musical legacy and recorded legacy is so great because he recorded so much material that it really illustrates the changing times and the different eras that he walked.
When I first heard him sing, I thought he was a black guy singing, because that's what he sounds like. And it figures because he grew up in New Orleans with wonderful black musicians.
Jazz singer Ray Gelato can't be the only person to have made that mistake. But in fact, Louis Prima's grandparents were Sicilians who'd arrived in New Orleans at the end of the 19th century. New Orleans historian Bruce Boyd Rabin.
He grows up in Treme, which is also often referred to as the oldest African-American neighborhood in North America. In fact, it was Crazy Quilt. Demographically, it was all mixed up with many Sicilians as well as Creoles and African-Americans, French, some Hispanics.
Like a lot of people in New Orleans, the Prima family's #1 passion was music, as Louis's widow Gia Mayone Prima.
boxing, and he did both, and this was not good for the tender fingers of a violinist. One day his brother Leon left town to go play in a band job for a week, and he left one of his trumpets at home, and Louis picked it up and tried it, and he loved it, and from that day on he never put it down.
New Orleans was musically a very vibrant place at the beginning of the 20th century, and from his earliest days, Louis was surrounded by all sorts of music, from opera to jazz. Otto invited Louis up to New York to play in a new club opening on 52nd Street called the Famous Door. It wasn't actually famous then, but it soon would be.
He became the hottest act on 52nd Street. Some people would even argue that Louis Prima's popularity built the phenomenon of 52nd Street in New York, which of course was extremely important for the development of jazz in that city. And I think what put him over was the fact that he gave himself entirely to performance.
I got a job at a place called the Famous Door, and I just happened to hit in a spot that caught on. And then Tommy Dorsey and all the boys who were working in New York at the time at the radio stations would come in and would have the jam sessions. That's where the jam sessions first started.
Even on these early recordings,
He always changed with the times. He would never get stuck into one mold. He wanted to stay in the forefront. So he started his big band.
big band music was all about sophistication. Think Glenn Miller or Tommy Dorsey, an elegantly besuited leader standing in front of a group of well-regimented musicians smiling at the audience. Well, that just wasn't Louis Prima. Still, it didn't stop him working, and Louis was almost constantly on the road. And then, just after America entered the Second World War, he discovered the key that would make him a household name again. And it lay in a song he wrote about his mother.
I eat cutlet parmesan so that I can gaze upon Angelina. Angelina, the waitress at the pizzeria.
He has a hit with Angelina, and that's followed by things like Oh Marie, Felice no Capicia, Please No Squeeze of the Banana,
Hey, please, no squeeze of the banana.
Bachagaloop.
Bachagaloop. Makes love on the stove.
This is when his Italian heritage begins to kick in. He's representing his Italian-American ethnicity as though he's proud of it.
On the step, he's full of the pep with his Maria.
Their success is actually quite remarkable, given the fact that America was at war with Italy at the time. Indeed, it made him something of a cause célèbre.
They tried to ban Louis' music, his Italian novelties, on the radio, and the president of the Musicians Union, James Petrillo, and Governor LaGuardia of New York all went to bat for Louis, and they kept his music on the airways and kept the dignity of the Italian Americans in this country.
I think one of the things he's doing is saying, don't forget that, Italian Americans in the United States, we're on the right side here. This country is never kind to its enemies, particularly if they are residing in this country. During World War I, Germans had a lot of trouble in this country, and obviously we all know what happened to the Japanese during World War II here. It was quite possible that Italians would be treated the same way, and I think to some extent what Louis Prima was doing diffused that tension and sent the right kind of signal. Apparently it worked.
His girl vocalist at that time was Lillian Carroll, and she had a huge big hit on the song I'll Walk Alone.
I walk alone, tell you the truth, I'll feel lonely.
And when our soldiers were in Germany, in Cologne, there was a big, huge boulder of some kind that marked the city square. Our soldiers spray painted on there, I'll walk Cologne. We love you, Lillian.
During the big band era, the women were swooning over Louis, and they'd line up the sides of his stage with all Italian delicacies and foods that they would cook. And he was a big heartthrob.
I used to think he was the most gorgeous thing that walked. And I didn't realize until after we divorced that he wasn't good looking. But the women found him irresistible. He really was.
Louis Prima never had any trouble attracting women. He was on his third marriage when he played a gig in Virginia Beach and met the catalyst for his next great renaissance, and eventually the fourth Mrs. Prima, Keely Smith.
Louis made an announcement that he was looking for a singer. And I was so shy in those days, I didn't tell anybody I sang or anything. And my brother finally told Louis' wife that I sang. And she told Louis, and he called me up from the beach on that following Sunday. And I went up barefoot, and I thought something was wrong with my mother. He was calling me over the microphone. And I ran up to him. I said, anything wrong with my mom? He said, no. He said, but I understand you're a singer. And I started getting nervous. I started patting his arm. I said, yeah, but not your kind. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I sing with a little local band around town. I earn $5 a night, He said, I want you to sing. And I sang, and he hired me on the spot.
But what seemed at first sight to be a cast-down career soon began to look less promising.
The big band started going down around 50, 51. We'd be on the road, and one end of a ballroom would be Louis Prima, and the other end of the ballroom would be Harry James. And there just wasn't enough work for the big bands. And then Louis finally decided that we would go to work just the two of us. And that's what we did. We worked every joint and every dive on the East Coast. I didn't realize what we were doing, and Louis was such a pro that nothing was challenging for him. He was just fantastic. We were broke. I was pregnant, and we didn't have a job. And Louis called a friend of his, Bill Miller, who was the entertainment director at the Sahara in Las Vegas, and told him the truth. He said, I'm broke. My wife's pregnant. We need a job. And he told him, so I can give you a couple of weeks in the lounge. And Louis said, I'll take it. And Bill said, Louis. I said, lounge. He said, you're used to working the big room.
A tip-off from his brother Leon, Louis coaxed out to Las Vegas a promising saxophone player named Sam. It was infectious stuff.
Louis Prima is extremely important and maybe doesn't always get the recognition he deserves in terms of the wellspring coming out of rhythm and blues that produces rock and roll. Some of the contributions coming out of that band, that shuffle rhythm, for example, you take a song like Zoom.
This was the all-important element of sex. Louis and Keely played up their sexual chemistry to great effect, with Keely as the cool, deadpan femme fatale, and Louis the raunchy old goat.
We worked till 6 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes we'd go water skiing at 6 in the morning. But then we'd go home and we would sleep until about noon. We'd get up, Louis would go play golf. I'd spend all day with my daughters. He'd come home, we'd have dinner with the girls.
They'd made their own. They were promoted to the big room.
I think one of the biggest mistakes we made was leaving the lounge. But Louis wanted to appear in the big rooms, and everybody said, well, where do you work? And Sinatra would say, well, I'm headlining at the Sands, and this one would say, I'm headlining over here. And some people can handle stardom and some people can't. And if you don't take yourself too seriously, you can handle it. He had the attitude at times that he wanted to prove to people something, So we just kind of drifted apart. He just changed.
And when the breakdown came, it came rapidly.
One night at the Desert Inn, he refused to conduct for me on one of my songs, and he had Sam Butero conduct. He wouldn't talk to me backstage. He wouldn't even dress backstage. And I was taking nerve medicine and a shot of scotch to walk on stage at night. I was such a nervous wreck. So when that show was over, that was it. We went into court within 2 days after that.
Its acoustic feel had become quite electric. Again, I think they were trying to keep up with the times when the British invasion happened in America, the Rolling Stones.
A series of headaches and memory problems led Louis to seek medical help. The doctors found a tumor and recommended exploratory surgery.
The brain tumor is what killed him. They went in, they couldn't get it all. They got half of it. And then he went into a coma. And they moved him to New Orleans, and he was in the coma for a couple of years. It was sad that a man with that energy wound up being in a coma like that.